But anyway, that's not the main
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the DeKalb History Center. My name is Jennifer Bloomquist. I'm the archivist and volunteer coordinator here at the History Center. Welcome to Lunch and Learn. We appreciate your support. We appreciate you being here. Just a few notes, housekeeping things before we get started. We have a table in the back with membership information, so we are a member-based organization. If you're not already a member or on our email list, please meet us at the back table after the event and ask questions. Let us know if you're interested. We'd love to sign you up for membership, or at least get your email added to our email list. We do lots of really good programming here. If you have a smartphone or a cell phone, if you can make sure that it's on silent or vibrate for the duration of the program. Carmen and Lauren have agreed to sign autographs for those of you buying books, so if you would like to hang out for a little bit after the program, they're going to be signing autographs at the table here. We appreciate Little Shop of Stories being here, selling books for us today, so be sure to check with them. If you have a little one at home or elsewhere, please consider buying a book from Little Shop of Stories and support your local bookstore. So Carmen Agra Deedy is an award-winning author of 16 books for young readers, including The Rooster Who Would Not Be Quiet, Martina, The Beautiful Cockroach, Rita and Ralph's Rotten Day, and 14 Cows for America, which was a New York Times bestseller. Her latest books are Wombat Said Come In, released in October 2022, Karina Felina, released in August 2023, and The Peanut Man, which just came out this March. Her personal stories first appeared on NPR's All Things Considered. Funny and insightful and frequently irreverent, Deedy's narratives are culled from her childhood as a Cuban refugee in Decatur, Georgia, and she's going to talk a little bit about that today. She hosts the 4-time Emmy-winning children's program, Love That Book. Deedy is also an accomplished lecturer. She has been a guest speaker at the Library of Congress, Columbia University, the TED and TEDx conferences, and the Kennedy Center, and now the DeKalb History Center, among other distinguished venues. An editor and lifelong advocate for libraries, she previously served on the advisory board of the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. Lauren Agra Deedy graduated from Emory University before receiving her Master of Philosophy of the Americas from Trinity College in Dublin. Like William in the story, Lauren is the child and grandchild of refugees and grew up helping them make care packages for family still living in communist Cuba. New Shoes for Leo is her picture book debut. Lauren lives with her husband and family in Atlanta. I'd like to welcome Carmen and Lauren. Thank you so much.
That was a beautiful introduction. I should have known. We visited a little bit beforehand, so I should have known you'd do an accurate introduction. I have been introduced in many ways, as has every speaker who ever does this, and some things are more accurate than others. Oh, hello, thank you for coming. You may speak to me. Yes. So we just have a little time together. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new book. It's called The Peanut Man, and it's about coming to the United States, specifically to a little southern town called Decatur, Georgia. So I had not intended to read the book. I was going to tell you a little bit about it and leave it up to you to read. If you would like, I could read a little bit of it and then just talk a little bit about the historical background. Would you have a... Okay, so read a little?
Yes. Yes.
You're driving this, my friends. We're a nice, cozy group today, so that's the nice thing when it's a smaller group. It's like we should all go out and get tapas afterwards. did mention that earlier. Before we begin, I'm just going to say one thing. There's a word that appears before the story even starts. It is on the 2-page spread, and it's M-A-N-I. That is a Caribbean word that's really a derivative of an Arawak word. So Siboneyes and Taínos were the native peoples of Cuba, and that is a word that comes from them. In other Central and South American countries, you'll hear the same word, a different word, pardon me, for the same thing, cacahuate. Both are a word that means peanuts. So maní is the word used in Cuba for peanuts. And it's part of a song, and every person you ever meet, if they tell you they're Cuban, tell them to sing you the song of the Peanut Man, El Manicero. Money. I can't sing, but you don't care. Yeah. Money. The song of the Peanut Man wound through the streets of old Havana as smooth and bright as a red velvet ribbon. When the song reached my window, I gave the shutters a small push, and a gust of salty sea air rushed in, along with the scent of money, peanuts. I'm doing sound effects like you third graders, and I hope you're happy with that. And that meant, before I turn the page, money, Emilio. I squealed as the old man stepped into the lamplight like an actor onto a stage. He wore a jaunty hat, his face as wrinkled as old tobacco leaves, spread into a toothless smile. Coqui, he called. He knew everyone by name, and we all knew El Manicero, the Peanut Man. Now it was time to play our game. You see a very small child up there. I tucked my thumbs in my ears, stuck out my tongue, and made our silly sound. You're welcome to join in. Emilio clutched his chest in horror, then he laughed and stuck out his own tongue. The onomatopoeic sound we chose was fiddle, 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 which isn't quite the same. If you can come up with a better one, let me know for the next printing. We loved playing that game every single night. But one night was different. And that story code, right? That we're going to take a dog-leg turn. As Mommy tucked me into bed, she told me I must be very brave. We were leaving Cuba for los Estados Unidos. ¿Por qué? I asked. Why? I had so many questions. She sighed and drew me close. Because your gentle father is a man with opinions. And in our country, that can be dangerous. Will we come back? I asked. She hugged me tight and whispered, try not to worry. We'll be together, and that's all that matters. But that didn't answer my question. Children don't miss a thing. Would you like me to stop now and then just conclude them? Fine. Well, we're halfway there, so. Money, peanuts. My friend had appeared when I needed him most. Emilio, I cried, nos vamos. We're leaving. I told him everything. I think you're like your new country, he said. And lowering his voice, he added, they say it is the land of plenty, liberty, and beisbol. Hold it, what? I swiped my arm across my damp eyes. Baseball? I love baseball, Emilio. And I do hate generalizing, but I must tell you that I have yet to meet a Cuban who doesn't love baseball. It doesn't matter where they sit on the spectrum of politics, religion, or faith. See, already there is something to love in your new country, he said. But don't forget your friend Emilio. Nunca, I promised. Never? His answer was to stick out his tongue. So I, He turned to go. Hasta mañana, I shouted after him. Adios, Coqui, he called back. We left Havana the next day. We had some discussions about the little girl crying, and I won that one. You don't always win them. Children cry. Children need to see children who have feelings like they do and see how they are resolved. We're trying to help them navigate the world, and they need maps. Speaking of maps, I love the next illustration. It was months, I hope you'll love it too, before we reached our new home in Decatur, Georgia. That first night, the wind hissed through the windows of our attic apartment, Feld Avenue, down from Agnes Scott, Old Craftsman House, Mr. and Mrs. Frank Leslie. That's how they like to be called. I'll tell you more later. My father, Papi, sealed them shut with shiny silver tape. This is not in the book, but I will tell you, he called it Coqui his whole life. Coqui. My sister Daisy told me this was why we couldn't hear the Peanut Man's song. And so we fell asleep to the rattle of a warm radiator and waited for spring. Spring came in Georgia. Off went the tape from the windows, but no Peanut Man sang that night, nor any other night that followed. I was homesick, so I'll show you this part first. It's my phone. I originally had in there that I looked out the window and the little southern children were making pollen angels, but they made me take that out. I thought that it was accurate, funny. Editors don't like funny, I need to tell you all that. First thing that goes in a manuscript. Don't need that, it's funny. Don't need it, yeah, but it's funny. Don't need it, it's for kids. You don't need it. I know, it's when you grind it. And I'm an editor, but I like funny. 3 more Georgia Springs came and went. I made new friends, picked up some wobbly English, and learned a funny game about a bridge that kept falling down. I was still homesick. Being here, missing there, but one thing reminded me of home. Can you all tell me before I turn the page? Can you guess? Baseball. Every season, Papi and I listened to the games on the radio. In 1966, the Milwaukee Braves moved to Atlanta. Outfielder Henry Aaron quickly became our favorite player. That fall, Papi had a surprise for my birthday. 2 tickets to the new ballpark, which is now the old ballpark, which is now gone. We were going to see Hammer and Hank Aaron. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. There are just not enough oh boys. I felt like they should go all the way across the page. That radio came from that Baptist church over there. Lauren's going to show you the same thing. We both actually love pulling in things that we can show that were historically accurate in our childhoods if it's a personal story. All right, now we're near the end. We're just going to barrel on that and finish it up. Okay. It was a hot September. It's a lie. It was a malarial September. I remember how hot it was. Afternoon, when we strolled into the stadium. The air reeked of greasy French fries, sweaty people, and smelly bathrooms. I pinched my nose. Bobby, it stinks! Kids love that word so much. You guys, I cannot tell you. When you read this book and you say, it stinks, they're like, ah! I just live in their world. Let's go home and listen to the game on the radio, I pleaded. Coqui said, Papi, baseball is a lot like life. If you can stand the smell, you're gonna love the game. I hope you're right. I grumbled and kept holding my nose. The crowd was on its feet when we reached our seats. What's going on? I shouted to Papi. He lifted me up higher and I saw Hank Aaron, number 44, running onto the field. The cheers and whistles were so deafening, I almost missed it. Peanuts, get your peanuts, red hot right here, step right up, peanuts. Who would that be? The Peanut Man at the ballpark? So that's where they kept him. But this guy looked nothing like my Emilio. His cheeks were red from the midday sun. He wore a paper cap and an easy smile that revealed a row of milk-white teeth. Look, Bobby, peanuts, 50 bags, please, I ordered. He laughed and bought me 1 bag. One warm, oily, yummy bag of peanuts. I breathed in the familiar smell of roasted peanuts. My throat tightened and one fat tear rolled down my cheek. "You all right, kiddo?" asked the peanut man. "My name is Coqui," I muttered. "Well, I'm Big D. Nice to meet you, Coqui. Where you from?" "Cuba," I said, biting my lip. Heard they've had a little trouble down there." "I didn't do it," I huffed. And he roared with laughter. When he roared with laughter, I'm not going to put the book down, you know. A few grown-ups gasped. My astounded father opened his mouth to speak. Big D raised one bushy eyebrow. "Are you all right, sir?" When I didn't answer, maybe Big D wasn't so different from Emilio after all. And for one shining moment, I was here, I was there, I was home. Because home is where you find a friend, I guess. That's the whole story, and you have to clap now. I have about 5 minutes left, and I want to use them to talk a little bit about the history behind this. Lauren and I are going to open up for questions if you'd like. But if you have time, please read the back matter on this. It has a very surprising coda to this story. So when we came, I love talking about Historical Society. There's so little I have to say. The revolution was in 59. 62 was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Is that right? Yes. 63 was when Kennedy was shot. We left in December of 63. It was a very difficult time. My parents lived there the first 4 years of the Cuban Revolution. My father worked for La Unión Azucarera, the sugarcane workers union. My mother was a socialist. My father, as he would say, "Your mother was a socialist, I was a realist." He was hoping for elections. We hadn't had them in years. Batista had brought in socialism, and there had been social programs, but he had been a dictator, and he had not allowed. It had been. I would be inaccurate now if I would be wrong to guess, but I will say it was more than 4 years, closer to 6 or more. That there had been no elections, and besides that, if you could live your life, you could travel, but if you opposed the government, if you were involved in nefarious things, you would disappear. And so Cubans really supported this. Over 95% of Cubans, and these are the facts, I like looking at data, that came from the UN back in the 60s. Over 95% of Cubans supported the revolution. And they had hoped that this would usher in a time of democracy and greater freedoms and liberty. And, but it didn't happen that way. I had wonderful parents who told me many stories and would say to me, my father in particular, "Do not believe me, do not believe anyone, do the work, do the research, check the sources, look at sources you don't like, listen to people you don't agree with. Anything else is the way you lose your democracy." And that's a hard thing for us to hear, because we want people to agree with us because we believe we're right, and often we are, by God. But that creates a sound barrier between other opinions, other ways of thinking, and perhaps uncomfortable truths, right? So when my father went to get permission to leave, I'll do this quickly, there was a process, and it hasn't changed very much. Cuba was laid out on a grid, like many European cities, so square blocks. Every block had and has to this day a Comité para la Defensa de la Revolución, a committee for the defense of the revolution, which sounds very patriotic, but it's also known among the locals as the snitch house. So if there is, a public gathering or something, you go. If you don't go, it's noted. And at the same time, people are human, and there are good people in every ism. Can we acknowledge that, even if they don't agree with us, right? So after you decided to leave, you went to the local police station in your quadra. Your quadra? Okay. And you were given different papers. You could not work after that. You couldn't receive ration cards anymore. You ate at the mercy of your friends and family, or you worked the black market, which my father did, by painting an old car that we had. He was an accountant, my father, into a taxi, and he had false papers. And some of the funniest stories I've ever heard from my father are about driving a cab in communist Cuba with false papers and nearly getting caught. How can that be funny? I tell you, people would have to sit down listening to him. I knew the stories, and I would laugh till I cried. And then one day I said, Bobby, how do you do that? His own brother had been in prison in Cuba. He was a young 17-year-old who put up a political cartoon making fun of Fidel in his office. And he was picked up and sent to the Island of Pines, which is the really notorious prison. And he died the day he was released. He had been tortured for a very long time. We were already here when that happened. But at the time, I remember asking Papi, I don't know, I laughed, but then later, as I've grown older, I realized some of these stories are very, very difficult to hear. And he said, si eres cubana, te ríes hasta que llora y lloras hasta que te ríes. If you're a Cuban, you laugh until you cry, and you cry until you can laugh again. I don't even know what that means yet. I think it means put one foot in front of the other when there are hard times. Put one foot in front of the other. Laughter doesn't last forever, and neither do tears, right? So, finally our papers come. Then they take them away. Then they come. And then they say we're leaving, and then we're not. And then they had to come to the house, and this is a great story, to do an inventory, because they have to inventory. It's a communist system, so everything belongs to the people. So they have to inventory everything in your house a month before you leave, and all those things have to be in the house when you leave, or you can't leave. So of course my mother was giving everything away that she could before they did the first inventory, like we would do. And the woman who was the head of the committee in our block came over and she said, Esther, your little girl has some beautiful clothes, because my grandmother would hand make all our dresses and embroider them. And we could only take the clothes we were wearing. We couldn't take any at that time. It's changed back and forth. Could you spare some dresses? So my mother went in and got a whole armful of dresses. And she said, I'm having some trouble with my eyes. Lauren has never heard the story. I'm having some trouble with my eyes. I may not see your house very well for the next few days. And so my mother said she moved more stuff out of that house in 2 days. That's what I mean. We can't forget our common humanity. We can't look at that person and say, you are evil, because you don't even know them. You don't know their history. You don't know their story. My mother didn't know who this woman was. She didn't know who my mother was. But in that moment of shared humanity, it didn't matter. And that's the only thing I think is ever going to save us. But it's powerful. It's more powerful than hate ever could be. So then we went to Mexico. We had distant cousins. We've got to move quickly because I'm at the end. Distant cousins we had never met, my mother had never met. And she wrote to them. And they were able to, her uncle, able to pay for our visas. That was the beginning of everything. So we ended up in Mexico for 2 months, waiting for our American papers to come. And after 2 months they did. And then we came to Feld Avenue, to a tiny little house. And our sponsors were Frank and Marianne Leslie. He was an American GI, and she had spent the last years of the war at Bergen-Belsen in charge of one of the, they're not houses, barracks, kinderbarrack. See, in Belsen, we learned from her, and then later I learned reading, they did house children. They didn't necessarily go, it was Auschwitz where they went directly to them. And they had asked for a family with children. And I didn't learn that until I spoke just like this somewhere. And a woman came up to me and said, you don't know me, but I'm the niece of Frank and Marion Leslie. And she was actually, she could never have children. She was my aunt by marriage. And she said, you may not know this, but she was at Belsen, and she took care of children there. And you and your sister were with them and your parents because they wanted a family with children, and you were the first family that came up with children. I will remember them forever. The Jewish, may your memory be a blessing. May their memory. I really feel that about them. And I thank Decatur. So I'm going to end with that because I'm going to get off of Clunt and we don't need that. This town opens its doors. Laura, may I have one more minute? I will never get to speak this way here. Carl Jones was a doctor. He had a little office down there on Ponce. He saw all the refugees for free. Mr. McKinney, the pharmacist, he gave everybody medicine for free. For years, until people got on their feet. The Nichols, they gave so many people work. My father's gone, and my mother's gone, and my sister's gone. And I'm the only one left to tell you these things. And I'm forgetting the names, but I want them said here because I want them remembered. And I want them remembered because I want this town to continue to be that kind of place. Thank you.
So how are we for time? So does anybody know what our end time is? 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock. Okay, so I'm going to follow that. So nice to meet you all. Thank you all so much for coming out. I'm Lauren. As you have probably guessed, I am her daughter, number 3, the youngest, the most beautiful. So we also have an option of how to do this. I can either do like my mom did and read you the story from front to back and have a little bit of time for Q&A, or I can give you a summary of the story and then we have more time to talk about the process of making the book, the story behind it, and so on and so forth. So it really depends on what you want. So raise your hand if you'd like me to read the book from cover to cover. Okay, raise your hand if you just like the summary, and then we can release some more time on questions. All right, we're gonna summarize. All right, so my book is called New Shoes for Leo, and it was written by a wonderful woman called Susan Gao, and I'll talk about her as we go on because she was very integral to the making of this book. She brought all the words to life and worked together very closely because the interiors are all based on family photos of mine and pictures that I took from around my house and around my abuela's apartment and pictures of family photos, everything. Because it's based, on my life in a very personal way. So basically what the story is, it's about making remittance boxes. Is anybody kind of familiar with the idea of remittances? In the old English days, there used to be somebody called a remittance man who would live out in the colonies and was sent money to basically keep them away from home. A remittance is basically just something that you send back to someone who is not there. And so these remittance boxes were built by Cubans really around the world. A lot of them ended up in the United States, some ended up in Spain, some ended up, in Argentina, you name it. And Cubans at the time, when I was a child, were going through a particularly hard time. It was called the Special Period. It's communist language because it just has that special little ring to it. So the Special Period was after the fall of the USSR. The Soviet Union had been propping up a lot of the Cuban economy, such as it was. It wasn't much, but it was something. So that's why even now, if you look at pictures of Cuba, you'll see either old cars from the 50s before the communist government came in, or you'll see old Soviet vehicles. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was even less to go around when already there had been very little. And so it really fell on Cubans abroad to kind of keep their families from starving, to make these boxes of food and medicine and clothes, anything you can really think of. Because as a Cuban, as in other communist countries, you would get a ration. If I remember correctly, it's a bi-monthly ration. And you're supposed to be able to take that ration to the commissary or the dispensary, and you're supposed to be able to get food, medicine, whatever your needs are. But if you go there and there's nothing there, well, congratulations, you're just going to be hungry or barefoot. And there's a height difference between Cubans who are my age, who were children during the special period, and children born before and after. So it was very serious. And so my abuela made and organized the making of just boxes and boxes and boxes. So once a month we would go up to their home in Estados, and my mom and my tia Terci and my abuela would turn the old bedroom that my mom and my tia Terci used to share when they were girls, a little twin bed, and it would be stacked with boxes, and she'd have lists, and they would just go through who gets what and make sure everybody got what they need. And then they would include one copy of the list with a box so that whoever received it would know what had been stolen by the communist authorities. So, old joke, how do you send a 20-pound box to Cuba? You start with a 40-pound box. You'll hear the same joke about how do you send a box to Soviet Russia, how do you send it to, you know, communist Romania. Same people, different country. And one of the things that were sent were shoes. So there would be paper cutouts that you would slide into the shoe and figure out what size needed to go to that person. And I had totally forgotten about the shoes, because mostly another kind of aside is while the adults were making this, we were not really allowed to help as children because they had their system. My mom already mentioned that my abuela was like basically an archivist. She had the system, she had lists, and grubby little paws did not need to get involved and put the wrong thing in the wrong box. So we would look through old boxes of family photographs that had been gradually brought out from Cuba one way or another, and we would ask questions. Who's this in the picture? Who's that? Are they alive? Are they in Cuba? Are they America? Who's this box going to? How do you know them? Tell me about them. And so that time was how we learned about our family and how we learned to love family that we couldn't meet. And in some cases, most cases, would never meet. Which is the basis of my story, where a little boy is helping to make a box, and he's given an outline for a footprint, and he goes to different family members trying to find a match. And as he goes, he learns more about the cousin he's finding the shoes for, until in the end, he discovers that, of course, the footprint is a match for his own, that he and his cousin who are the same size, and sends his own shoes to his cousin. If that sounds like a familiar story type, it's because it is. The folktale of someone going on a journey and visiting 3 people. It's always 3. It's the number of stability. It is always in folklore. You can't sit on a stool with 2 legs, but you can sit on a stool with 3. It's just folklore reframed. And also a little bit of Cinderella, our oldest version of that is from ancient Egypt. So again, it sounds familiar because it is. The stories repeat for reasons because they speak to us. And then the very end of the book is we get a very little illustration, if you turn to the very back page, of his cousin getting the shoes. Anyway, so I changed parts of the book as I wrote, which was inspired by finding those footprints again. My abuela had saved some of them, just as mementos. And I realized that my niece and nephew would have no idea what this was. And it was also during the process when we were losing my abuela to, you know, dementia and Alzheimer's. And I was thinking a lot about her and her legacy. And I was thinking about the footprints and everything that she did, because she put all these boxes together on no money. You know, my abuelo, he either worked at Johnson Steel Mill or he worked at the Amoco factory making plastics. And he eventually retired, and they were on a very limited income. She worked at Macy's. You know, they were not swimming in money to send people, but they always made do and found a way, and taught us to always make do and found a way, and that you always have something you can send. And as I was thinking about it, this story formed. And I decided that I needed to write it down, 1, because it was stuck in my head and it wouldn't leave me alone, and 2, because I thought that I owed it to my abuela. Because she'd given so much to other people, I wanted that remembered. But as I was writing it, I did have to change a lot. I changed the main character from me to a little boy. I changed the setting from Hostel, because they moved from Decatur to Hostel, so my abuelo could have room to grow crops. He was really a farmer at heart. He couldn't grow stuff here. He needed to go where there was land. So we went up to Hostel. So I changed the setting to Miami, which is where a lot of Cubans ended up. And a lot of our family did end up, and I have very fond childhood memories of our very, very, very long car trips down the turnpike that never ended. Because I needed a little more distance, because as you imagine writing, you know, a book for your abuela as she's passing, if you try and write it too much one for one, you can't do it. It's too close. So I put in separations. So it's not a one for one, but the people there are recognizable to me, and they're recognizable to our family members that read the book, and that's enough for me. But this story is personal, but also very universal, because the making of remittance boxes is something that just takes place throughout refugee families, because so often you don't get to all go. Sometimes it's just one small piece of a family and everybody else is behind. Sometimes most people can go, but it's a small group is behind. But either way, people get split up. And I found in sharing the story, and starting to share it with kids, that things haven't changed that much. If I'm talking to a big group of kids, there's usually at least someone who's like, yeah, we send stuff back to X, Y, Z. So I'm glad that I wrote that book for this reason, especially for the younger kids who are still doing this today and sending stuff to Ukraine or Burma or, you know, Syria, you name it. So this is at once kind of a book that's very specific to me and my family, to the point that I was, like I said, I took pictures around my abuela's house for them to put in the interiors. You know, my niece and nephew can play, you know, spot the thing from my abuela's house. But it's also universal, having, you know, a base in folklore that's cross-cultural, and in a experience of supporting a family back home that's, you know, unfortunately probably not going to change anytime soon. So that's kind of the gist of the book. If anybody has, let me see how we're doing for time, because I know you all are here on your lunch breaks. So if anyone has any questions about kind of the making of the book, or really anything at all, I'm happy to answer it. Did I talk so much that I took all the questions?
How much can you collaborate with your mom or get input?
So my mom was one of my readers. My husband was my primary reader. My husband's the poor man. His job after dinner is to sit down and read whatever I've written for the day. So he's my primary victim. But my mom also helped read the manuscript and made suggestions and edits, and I didn't take all of them, much to her chagrin, because I know there's a few things she really wishes I put in. But really, my mom's primary contribution was the years of watching her go through the writing and editorial and publication process, and giving me the experience with that process, so that when I did have a book I wanted to write, I knew how to do it, and I knew what going through the editorial process is going to be like, and what going through the publication process is going to be like. So her primary contribution beyond reading it and making suggestions was, you know, just giving me that secondhand experience of, okay, you have an idea, now this is how you make a book, which I'm very fortunate to have had that, because otherwise I think I probably would have been kind of lost as to what to do once I wrote out the book. But, you know, I literally grew up in the publishing house with my teddy bear. I remember sitting underneath the publishing house table with my teddy bear while she and the illustrator, Michael White, were going over Library Dragon. Mm-hmm. You know, so.
Lauren has an important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you trust him?
No.
I gave birth to 3 children. This one was born self-actualized from the moment she took her first breath. Lord actually didn't take, I don't think, any.
I took some.
I didn't say anything. But that was important, because she's had to be.
You gave me the line, one of the lines in the book where he says, "La caja," the box that tells our family they'll never be forgotten. And then we argued over whether it should be forgotten or remembered, and I said forgotten, you said remembered, and we did it my way.
It's beautifully illustrated, and that's the editor and not the mother talking. But Lauren will tell you, she was steeped in stories more than any of my children from the moment that when she started going to schools with me, she's 3 and 4. I would present to children, she would sit in the library, she taught herself to read, and then she would read her way to the 398.2s. And eventually ended up, she was just always facing the book. And I think we all have our own destiny. But thank you for saying that.
Did you have a target audience in mind when you started writing? And did that change as you wrote?
Sort of. I mean, I had my niece and nephew in mind, and they're elementary school age. So they were in my head, but I wasn't particularly thinking, okay, I need to, target my language to this reading level or that reading level. My goal was just to write out the story and to write it in an accessible way, in a way that would be good for reading aloud. But beyond that, I figured it was just going to take the shape it was going to take. And then if it ended up being something that was for 1 through 3 or for 3 through 5th, or great. But it was all just concentrating on writing the story, and then the audience would figure itself out when it was done, pretty much. But, elementary age was as targeted as I was thinking. It ended up being fairly broad, actually, because I've done this book with as young as pre-K, and I emphasize, places where they can interact with me, knock on the door, knock for me, she can give a hug, give yourself a hug. Or if I do it with older kids, I've done it, 5th grade, I talk more about the history part and, okay, what is an Iron Curtain, what are rations, who here, what's the first and second generation immigrant. So I change the presentation according to the age group, so I'm able to make it work for a wide range. So if you're writing yourself, and that's something you're thinking about, I honestly wouldn't sweat it too much, because you just tell the story you want to tell, and then you change things and explain things as necessary for the audience that you have.
Lauren, do you have plans to write another book?
So there's one that's tentatively spring 2027. It's called Don't Eat the Baby. And if you all are familiar with king cake, we make something very similar called Roscon de Reyes. So every January 6th, every 3 Kings Day, in Cuban and many Latin American households, not all of Latin America, but most of it, will make a beautiful round bread with candied fruit on it like jewels, so it's like a crown. And just like king cake, we hide the baby inside. So this is, it's a read aloud really, and this one does have a target age group. It's really for pre-K with, mix for me, built-in interactions, because, if you're working with a group of small kids, it really helps to have stuff built in of, the baby disappearing from the cake, and then it's just silly, who ate the baby? Open your mouth, don't eat baby. And it's based on my Tia Terci, who made sure that we kept celebrating 3 Kings Day, even in the US, so that tradition didn't get lost. And as she cut the bread, she would always yell at us, "Niños, don't eat the baby." And, I was thinking about her on 3 Kings Day and how she said that, and then it turned into, this little book for pre-K that will hopefully be fun and enjoyable. But yeah, spring 27 probably is what we're looking at.
And a question that either of you can answer, or both of you, two-part question. What about, or do you still have people in Cuba, and have you been back there? Have you been there?
So none of us have gone back, none of my family has ever gone back. There's a lot of complex reasons for that my mom can jump in. And part of it is that Cuba doesn't recognize my citizenship as an American or my mother's. If you are ever a Cuban citizen, or if you're the child of a Cuban citizen, they don't recognize your American citizenship. And generally speaking, traveling somewhere that doesn't recognize your American citizenship, especially a dictatorship, it's not something I really have on my bingo card for a lot of reasons. The other is that Cuba is very tightly controlled in terms of tourism. You stay in a hotel, the people that work there are only ones that have been approved by the government to work there. They're paid poorly, not treated well, and those are the ones who are allowed in. You'd be staying at hotels and eating in restaurants that ordinary Cubans couldn't go to. You'd be eating food that of a quality that regular Cubans couldn't go into, couldn't consume. You'd basically be living a tier above what the average person could ever hope to, because again, they wouldn't even be allowed in the buildings. And it's just, it's not something any of us want to do until we go and we have food that everybody can eat and stay in hotels that everybody can stay in. Or, ordinary Cubans aren't allowed on boats. You get a tour guide for a boat, the Cuban has to stay on shore. We're not gonna do that. And my abuelo had one youngest sibling still living, who's probably not gonna be with us very long. She passed, yeah. So my abuela's best friend of since the 1940s.
She was.
She's still with us, but that's when she's gone. That'll be the last link.
I don't want to think about it. She's in
Yeah.
her 90s. She's
Yeah.
lived forever. Don't go. So we're about to close. So from my end, so I wanted to make sure that I have sort of I went to Cuba with the Obama administration, with the Department of Defense. I went to Guantanamo before you guys go, oh my God. Did not go to the detention center. The administration sent authors to our military base where there's a K through 12 school. So I went, and she at the time was in Ireland, I think. Was at Trinity, so her middle sister Erin went with me. And we were able to swim in the water because oceans don't recognize geopolitical lines. So I felt that I swam in Cuban waters and I stood on Cuban land. I had a strange experience where there were still just over a dozen Cubans who had been caught on the other side when the base was closed off from the rest of the island. I have not returned because I joined PEN. If you're familiar with PEN America, they're based in New York. And it's a freedom to write organization. It's very progressive, and they support writers around the world who have been imprisoned, who are nonviolent, who've not committed any violent offenses. They've been imprisoned only for their words, whether spoken or written. What am I going to do in Cuba when I know there are Cuban writers and journalists that are rotting away in those prisons, and I'm going to go what? I personally can't do it. But as much as you could hear how strongly I feel about this, at the same time, I'm very apolitical. But sometimes there are these few times in our life when something comes up and you go, I don't want to take a stand. You don't have a choice. You don't have a choice. My own children, they are free to do whatever. I mean, you can tell. My girls have their own minds to make those decisions. But they knew what their grandparents went through. They knew, I just did an interview with a really interesting place, and they asked me some questions, and I brought the dress I wore from Cuba. It's this big. I was 3 years old.
Oh my God.
It fit her niece, my granddaughter, when she was 18 months. That's how stunted I was from lack of food. In an island where you could spit out a seed and something would grow the next day, but you're not allowed to grow a garden. Cubans can't swim at Varadero Beach. That's the tourist beach. Not allowed to swim there. When she says you can't own a boat, you can't unless you've been checked out by the government and you're a fisherman that's official by the government. And even then, we're not used to that. They sound like unreal stories. When people come from these places and tell their stories, it's human nature to go, what reason? And we think of all the places in the world where people have left and they bring their stories. The hardest thing in the world is to tell that story and have people not believe you. And I learned that the hard way in school. I don't know why I said that. I normally don't ever say that. But I'm old now. And I'm tired. And if you're not going to speak truth when you're old, when the hell are you going to speak? So no, as long as that despicable, it's not even a government, it's not even political, it's a mafioso state. As long as that is in place and people, and there are more, look this up, there are more torture and detention facilities in Cuba than there are schools. This is not hard to find. A cursory look through the internet. So no, I can't go. Leave it to them. Is there some happy question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Carmen
say anywhere in the South, I was there. I'm so old.
Spalding Drive Elementary.
Yes.
In Sandy Springs.
I was at Norton too.
I've
so
always
that's-
remembered it. And I remember you were so animated and you, educated us about Cuba, but you were so entertaining and so vivacious. And I've always remembered it, so I just wanna, validate what you've done all these years and that, that impact that both of you make on little readers is a big deal. So, thank you.
Well, hopefully, thank you so much. And hopefully it brings some conversation and questions are good. So, thanks.
Did I hear you mention that I forget the number, cows for America?
14 cows for
Is
America.
that your book? I just read that.
Oh, so
My
good.
daughter-in-law, an adult, gave it to me, an old lady, and I loved it. I think all the best children's books are good, no matter how old you are. And it was really
You
excellent.
know what children's books are great for? Middle school. They're excellent for middle school, especially for some of the more reluctant readers, because they have the visual support. I think you're going to close this up, aren't you?
Unless there are any last minute questions, I just want to make sure we have a little bit of time for
signing books.
autographs before you guys have to go. Okay, I did want to mention one other thing. I was reminded about an event we have going on this evening. If you're interested, we're doing a tour with a group called History Afoot. In conjunction with them, we're going to be doing a tour around the outside of our building, around the city of Decatur, looking at monuments and things. It's $5. You can still buy tickets on our website, and it starts at 6:30. So you can meet here at 6:30 and go on the tour. Just check out our website, DeKalb.